Wyoming Territory, 1872. The dust devils danced across the valley as 10-year-old Emma Miller clutched her mother's threadbare shawl, squinting up at the tall wooden arch that marked the entrance to the Flying F Ranch. The carved sign swung gently in the autumn breeze, creaking like it held secrets. The sprawling property stretched as far as her young eyes could see, dotted with cattle and framed by the majestic Bighorn Mountains that turned purple in the fading light. "Mama," Emma whispered, tugging at her mother's sleeve. "Is this the place?" Beatrice Miller nodded, her chestnut hair escaping from her simple bun, face weary but determined. At 24, she looked older than her years, the past 3 as a widow having carved fine lines around her eyes that appeared when she smiled, which wasn't often these days. Her blue calico dress had been mended more times than she could count, but she still carried herself with quiet dignity. "Yes, sweetheart, this is it." They'd traveled for days after the boarding house where Beatrice worked in Cheyenne had burned down, leaving them with nothing but rumors of a ranch owner looking for help. The journey had depleted their meager savings, and Emma could see the worry etched in her mother's face, though Beatrice tried to hide it. What they didn't know was that they were being watched. From the covered porch of the main house, 25-year-old Brandon Falconer observed the woman and child approach, his keen blue eyes narrowing slightly as he leaned against the post, thumbs hooked in his belt loops. His sandy brown hair fell across his forehead as he tilted his head, curious about these unexpected visitors. 3 years earlier, Brandon had inherited the Flying F when his father passed unexpectedly. Since then, he'd worked from sunrise to sunset to keep the ranch profitable, expanding from cattle to include horses and building a reputation for fair dealings and quality stock. His broad shoulders and strong hands were testament to the hours spent breaking horses and mending fences, though his face remained youthful despite the elements, with just a day's worth of stubble lining his strong jaw. "Cody," he called over his shoulder to his foreman. "We got company." The older man appeared beside him, following his gaze. "Probably looking for work. Word's out you need a housekeeper since Mrs. Wilkins left." Brandon nodded, watching as the pair made their way up the dusty path. There was something about the way the woman walked, head high despite her obvious exhaustion, that caught his attention. And the little girl beside her, clutching a worn rag doll, kept glancing up at the big house with a mixture of awe and apprehension. What were they running from? And why did he suddenly feel responsible for them when they hadn't even exchanged a single word? As Beatrice and Emma approached the house, the little girl's grip on her mother's hand tightened. The ranch was larger than any place they'd ever seen, and the man on the porch was watching them intently. Emma could feel her mother's nervousness in the slight tremor of her fingers. "Remember your manners," Beatrice whispered, straightening her shoulders as they reached the bottom of the porch steps. Before her mother could speak, Emma stepped forward. The desperation of their situation and the memory of her mother crying silently the night before had awakened something fierce in her young heart. "Sir," she called up to Brandon, her voice stronger than her small frame suggested. "Are you the ranch owner?" Brandon's eyebrows rose as he studied the determined little girl. "I am. My mother is the hardest worker in all of Wyoming Territory," Emma declared, words tumbling out before Beatrice could stop her. "She can cook and clean and sew better than anybody. And I can help too. I'm good with chickens and I can gather eggs without breaking them." Beatrice's cheeks flushed crimson. "Emma, that's enough." She placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder before looking up at Brandon. "I apologize for our intrusion, Mr. Falconer. We heard in town you might be in need of household help." Brandon descended the steps, his movements fluid and graceful for a man of his size. Up close, Beatrice was struck by how young he looked, certainly younger than she'd expected for a man who owned such a prosperous ranch. His eyes were kind, though cautious. "And who might you be, ma'am?" he asked, his voice warm like honey over gravel. "Beatrice Miller," she answered. "And this is my daughter, Emma." Emma stepped forward again. "Please, Mr. Falconer. My mama needs this job. We don't have anywhere else to go." The raw honesty in the child's plea struck Brandon like a physical blow. He glanced at Beatrice, noting the mixture of embarrassment and quiet desperation in her eyes. There was a story there, one he suddenly wanted to know. "Well, Miss Emma," he said, crouching down to her level, "that's quite a recommendation you've given your mother. And it just so happens I am in need of someone to run the house." He glanced up at Beatrice. The position includes room and board for you both, of course. The relief that washed over Beatrice's face was palpable, though she quickly composed herself. When would you like me to start? Immediately, if that suits you, Brandon replied, standing back up. Cody here can show you to the housekeeper's quarters behind the main house. It's not much, but it's clean and private. As the foreman led Beatrice and Emma toward their new home, Brandon watched them go, struck by the feeling that his orderly life had just been irrevocably altered. What was it about this woman and her daughter that had him hiring them on the spot, without so much as asking for references? And why did he have the unsettling feeling that they were bringing trouble to his doorstep? Later that evening, after Beatrice had settled Emma into the small but comfortable bedroom of their new quarters, she sat at the humble wooden table, staring at the letter she'd retrieved from the depths of her satchel. The yellowed paper bore the official seal of the United States Army, and the words inside had haunted her for 3 years. The knock at the door startled her. She quickly folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket before opening the door to find Brandon standing there, holding a covered dish. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, offering the plate. "Cook made extra stew." "That's very kind of you," Beatrice replied, accepting the dish. The warmth from the plate seeped into her cold fingers. Emma's already asleep. The journey was exhausting for her. Brandon nodded, seeming reluctant to leave. "Mrs. Miller, please call me Beatrice." "Beatrice," he corrected with a small smile. "I realize I hired you without knowing much about your circumstances. I don't mean to pry, but is there anything I should know? About you and Emma?" The question hung in the air between them. Beatrice hesitated, one hand unconsciously touching the letter in her pocket. "My husband died 3 years ago," she said finally. "He was a soldier. Since then, Emma and I have been making our way as best we can." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Brandon studied her face, sensing there was more to the story. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said sincerely. "If there's anything you need, don't hesitate to ask." As he turned to leave, Beatrice was struck by a sudden impulse. "Mr. Falconer?" He paused, looking back at her. "Thank you," she said softly. Not everyone would hire a woman with a child in tow, especially on nothing but that child's word. Brandon's smile was genuine, lighting up his face in a way that made Beatrice's heart skip unexpectedly. "That child of yours has quite a persuasive spirit. Reminds me of someone I used to know." A shadow crossed his features briefly before he added, "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day." As he walked away, Beatrice closed the door and leaned against it, wondering what ghosts this young rancher carried with him, and whether coming to the Flying F had been a stroke of desperately needed luck, or a terrible mistake that would eventually expose the secrets she'd been running from for 3 years. Who was the person Emma reminded him of? And why did Brandon Falconer, with all his success and apparent kindness, live alone on this vast, beautiful ranch with no wife or family of his own? The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm for Beatrice and Emma. The housekeeper's duties were substantial, cooking for Brandon and the handful of ranch hands, keeping the main house clean, tending to laundry and mending, but Beatrice tackled each task with determination. Emma, true to her word, helped where she could, collecting eggs from the chicken coop each morning and assisting Cook with simple kitchen tasks after her lessons. Brandon had insisted that Emma continue her education and arranged for her to join the lessons his foreman's wife, Mrs. Peterson, gave to her own children 3 times a week. It was an unexpected kindness that brought tears to Beatrice's eyes when he first mentioned it. "Education is important," he'd said simply when she'd tried to thank him. "My mother taught school before she married my father. She would haunt me if I allowed a child on my property to go without learning." The mention of his mother was one of the rare glimpses into his past that Brandon offered. Despite living under the same roof, he remained something of a mystery to Beatrice. Unfailingly polite, generous with both Emma and herself, but guarded about his personal life. One evening in early December, as Beatrice was finishing the dinner dishes, she heard the piano in the parlor. Curious, she dried her hands and quietly made her way down the hallway. The door was ajar, and through the crack, she could see Brandon sitting at the grand piano, Emma perched beside him on the bench, watching intently as his fingers moved across the keys. "My sister used to play this song," he was saying, the melancholy melody filling the room. "She tried to teach me, but I never had the patience for it back then." Emma's voice was soft. "Where is your sister now?" Brandon's hands stilled on the keys. She died when I was about your age. There was a fever that swept through the area. Took her and my mother both within a week of each other. Like my pa, Emma said with the directness of childhood. He died in the war, but I don't remember him much. Sometimes I feel bad about that. Beatrice's heart clenched at her daughter's words. She started to step away, feeling as though she was intruding on a private moment, when Brandon spoke again. I have something that might help with that, he said, rising from the piano bench. He crossed to a bookshelf and returned with a small leather-bound volume. This is a memory book. You write down the things you want to remember about people you've lost, so they're never really gone. Emma took the book reverently. But I don't have many memories of Pa. Then you can write down the stories your mother tells you about him, Brandon suggested. Or you can start a new one for the memories you're making now. The tenderness in his voice as he spoke to Emma made Beatrice's chest ache. She slipped away before either of them noticed her, troubled by the growing affection she felt for this man who had given them shelter and shown such kindness to her daughter. Affection was dangerous. Getting attached to Brandon Falconer meant putting down roots, and roots could be discovered. The letter she kept hidden beneath the floorboard under her bed was proof of that. If what it contained ever came to light, she and Emma would have to flee again, and the longer they stayed, the harder leaving would become. Meanwhile, Brandon was fighting his own battle against his growing feelings for Beatrice. Her quiet strength and dignity impressed him daily, and watching her with Emma revealed a fierce, protective love that resonated with something deep inside him. But the walls he'd built around his heart after Sarah Jenkins had jilted him for a wealthy cattle baron 3 years earlier were high and thick. Besides, Beatrice was his employee, dependent on him for her livelihood and shelter. Taking advantage of that position would make him no better than the men he despised. Men like Harold Blackwell, the neighboring rancher who treated the women who worked for him as playthings to be used and discarded. No, whatever these feelings were, Brandon would keep them buried. Beatrice and Emma deserved security, not complications. What neither knew was that complications were already headed their way, carried by the winter winds that brought both the Christmas season and unwelcome visitors to the Flying F Ranch. The Christmas social at the town hall in nearby Pine Ridge was the highlight of the winter season. Ranchers and townspeople alike gathered to celebrate, setting aside rivalries and hardships for one night of music, dancing, and festivity. When Brandon casually mentioned it to Beatrice, suggesting she and Emma might enjoy attending with the ranch contingent, she was hesitant. I don't have anything suitable to wear to such an event, she admitted, embarrassed by the admission. Brandon's solution was characteristic of his thoughtfulness. The next day, he returned from town with a package for her, a length of forest green wool and enough trimmings to fashion a new dress. Consider it a Christmas bonus, he said gruffly when she tried to refuse. Emma mentioned it's your favorite color. The fact that he had remembered such a detail, shared by Emma during one of their increasingly frequent conversations, touched Beatrice deeply. That night, after Emma was asleep, she sat by lamplight, cutting and stitching the beautiful fabric, allowing herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to dance in Brandon's arms. The night of the social arrived with a light snowfall that dusted the landscape like sugar. Brandon waited by the wagon, breath fogging in the cold air, dressed in his best black suit with a crisp white shirt and string tie. When Beatrice emerged from their quarters, he momentarily forgot to breathe. The green wool dress accentuated her slender figure, the color bringing out auburn highlights in her chestnut hair, which she had arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. A few tendrils framed her face, softening her features. Emma bounced alongside her in a dress Beatrice had remade from one of her old ones, looking like a miniature lady. You look beautiful, Mama, Emma declared proudly. Doesn't she, Mr. Falconer? Brandon cleared his throat. Indeed she does, Miss Emma. You both do. He helped them into the wagon, his hand lingering on Beatrice's just a moment longer than necessary. The touch sent a current through her that had nothing to do with the cold. The town hall was transformed with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, lanterns casting a warm glow over the assembled crowd. Emma was quickly swept away by Mrs. Peterson to join the other children in a corner where games had been organized. Beatrice found herself standing awkwardly at the edge of the dance floor, acutely aware of being a newcomer in a community where most people had known each other for years. Brandon appeared at her side, offering a cup of punch. They don't bite. he said with a smile, nodding toward a group of women who were casting curious glances in their direction. Though they might talk your ear off with questions. Beatrice laughed softly. I'm not used to social gatherings anymore. After John died, there wasn't much cause for celebration. John was your husband? Brandon asked, realizing he knew very little about the man. Yes, he was a cavalry officer. We met when I was just 17, married a year later, and had Emma right after that. The familiar story rolled off her tongue easily. It was true as far as it went, but the omissions weighed on her conscience. Before Brandon could ask more, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. Harold Blackwell swaggered in, flanked by two of his ranch hands. The large man's face was already flushed from drink, his expensive suit stretched tight across his substantial girth. Brandon's expression darkened. "Excuse me," he said to Beatrice. "I need to have a word with Sheriff Daniels." As Brandon moved away, Beatrice found herself cornered by Blackwell, who had spotted her across the room and made his way directly to her side. "Well now, what have we here?" he drawled, his eyes traveling the length of her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You must be Falconer's new housekeeper I've been hearing about. Didn't mention you were such a pretty little thing." "Mr. Blackwell, I presume," Beatrice replied coolly. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on my daughter." She tried to step around him, but he blocked her path. "Now don't be in such a hurry, Mrs. Miller." "Beatrice Miller." "Mrs. Miller," he repeated, reaching out to touch one of the loose curls framing her face. "A widow, I hear. Must be lonely out there at the Flying F with just young Falconer for company." Beatrice jerked away from his touch. "Mr. Falconer is a perfect gentleman and an excellent employer." Blackwell laughed, a harsh sound that attracted attention from nearby dancers. "Is that all he is? Word around town is he's taken quite a shine to you and that little girl of yours. Setting up a nice little family arrangement, is he?" The insinuation made Beatrice's cheeks burn. "You misunderstand the situation entirely." "Do I?" Blackwell leaned closer, the smell of whiskey heavy on his breath. "A man like Falconer, living alone all this time after that Jenkins girl broke his heart, suddenly takes in a pretty widow and her child? Seems mighty convenient." Before Beatrice could respond, a hand gripped Blackwell's shoulder firmly. "The lady doesn't welcome your company, Blackwell," Brandon said, his voice deceptively calm though his eyes blazed. "I suggest you find someone else to bother." Blackwell turned, sneering. "Just having a friendly conversation with your housekeeper, Falconer. Or is she more than that?" Town's buzzing with speculation. Brandon's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Miller is an employee of the Flying F and deserves the same respect you'd show any lady. Though I suspect that concept is foreign to you." "Such high principles," Blackwell mocked. "Makes a man wonder what you're hiding behind all that righteousness." His gaze shifted back to Beatrice, eyes narrowing. "People who appear suddenly out of nowhere often have interesting stories. I make it my business to know about newcomers in my territory." The veiled threat sent ice through Beatrice's veins. Blackwell couldn't know anything about her past, could he? Brandon stepped between them. "You're drunk, Blackwell. Go home before you embarrass yourself further." For a tense moment, it seemed Blackwell might escalate the confrontation, but Sheriff Daniels appeared at Brandon's side, hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. Blackwell backed down with a forced laugh. "No harm meant," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Just being neighborly." His gaze slid past Brandon to Beatrice once more. "We'll continue our chat another time, Mrs. Miller." As Blackwell retreated, Brandon turned to Beatrice. "I apologize for that. Blackwell has a reputation for harassing women, especially those he thinks are vulnerable." Beatrice nodded, still shaken by the encounter. "He seemed to be implying he knows something about me." "It's just his way of trying to unsettle people," Brandon assured her, though his own expression was troubled. "But perhaps we should head back to the ranch. I don't trust him not to cause more trouble tonight." As they collected Emma and made their way back to the wagon, Beatrice couldn't shake the feeling that Blackwell's interest in her past was more than just drunken intimidation. If he started asking questions in the right places, the fragile security she had built at the Flying F could crumble overnight. What she didn't realize was that Brandon was harboring similar fears. Blackwell had resources and connections. If he decided to investigate Beatrice out of spite, would he discover whatever secret she was hiding? And more importantly, would it endanger her and Emma? The ride back to the ranch was subdued, with Emma falling asleep against her mother's shoulder despite the cold. When they arrived, Brandon carried the sleeping child into the housekeeper's quarters and gently laid her on her bed, while Beatrice removed her shoes and tucked the blankets around her. In the small sitting room, Brandon hesitated by the door. "Beatrice," he began, his voice low, "if there's something in your past that could cause trouble, something Blackwell might discover, I want you to know you can trust me." The sincerity in his eyes nearly broke her resolve. For a moment, she considered telling him everything. About John's betrayal, about the stolen money that had never been recovered, about the army investigator who believed she knew where it was hidden. But fear held her tongue. "There's nothing," she lied, hating herself for it. "Blackwell was just trying to intimidate me." Brandon studied her face for a long moment before nodding. "All right, but my offer stands. Whatever it is, we can face it together." The word "together" hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Brandon took a step closer, his eyes dropping to her lips briefly before meeting her gaze again. Beatrice felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by an invisible force. A log shifted in the small stove, sending up a shower of sparks that broke the moment. Brandon stepped back, clearing his throat. "Good night, Beatrice," he said softly. "Merry Christmas." After he left, Beatrice sank into a chair, trembling. She was falling in love with Brandon Falconer, had perhaps been falling since the first day on his porch when he'd crouched down to speak to Emma with such gentle respect. And if the look in his eyes tonight was any indication, he felt the same way. But love required honesty, and the truth would cost her everything. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. Emma woke Beatrice at first light, eager to see if Santa had visited despite their modest circumstances. To her delight, she found a small stocking filled with candies, hair ribbons, and a beautifully carved wooden horse hanging from the mantel. "Look, Mama," she exclaimed, holding up the horse. "It looks just like Mr. Falconer's stallion, Thunder." Beatrice examined the carving, noting the fine details that could only have come from someone intimately familiar with the animal. "It's beautiful, Emma." There was a knock at the door, and Emma rushed to open it, revealing Brandon standing there with a small package in his hands. "Merry Christmas," he said, smiling as Emma showed him the carved horse. "Did you make this, Mr. Falconer? It looks just like Thunder." Brandon nodded, pleased by her reaction. "I did. I thought you might like a reminder of your first Christmas at the Flying F." "I love it," Emma declared, throwing her arms around his waist in an impulsive hug that momentarily startled him before he patted her back awkwardly. "I have something for your mother, too," he said, extending the package to Beatrice once Emma released him. Beatrice accepted it hesitantly. "You've already given us so much, Brandon. The fabric for my dress, the Christmas bonus." "This is different," he insisted. "Please, open it." Inside the simple wrapping, Beatrice found a small leather-bound book similar to the one Brandon had given Emma for memories, but older, the leather worn smooth with age. "That's why I want you to have it," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Someone who understands its value." Their eyes met over the book, and in that moment, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings too strong to be denied any longer. Emma, oblivious to the charged atmosphere, tugged at Brandon's sleeve. "We have something for you too, Mr. Falconer." "Mama, can I give it to him now?" Grateful for the interruption, Beatrice nodded and watched as Emma retrieved a carefully wrapped package from beneath her bed. "We made it together," Emma announced proudly as Brandon unwrapped a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "Mama said it matches your eyes." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm at this revelation of her private observation. Brandon ran his fingers over the neat stitches, visibly moved. "It's perfect," he said. "No one has made me a gift like this since." He trailed off, swallowing hard. "Thank you, both of you." He wound the scarf around his neck immediately, the gesture making him look younger, more vulnerable somehow. "I came to invite you both to Christmas dinner at the main house. The Hands who don't have family nearby will be joining us, and Mrs. Peterson is bringing her famous apple pie. Can we, Mama? Please?" Emma pleaded. Beatrice hesitated only briefly before nodding. "We would be delighted." Christmas dinner was a revelation to Beatrice. Instead of the formal, hierarchical affair she had expected, Brandon insisted that everyone, from the newest stable boy to himself, sit together at the long table in the dining room. There was laughter, storytelling, and a genuine warmth that reminded her of family gatherings from her childhood. Brandon, seated at the head of the table with Beatrice to his right and Emma beside her, seemed transformed. The reserve that usually characterized him had melted away, revealing a man who listened intently to each person's story, laughed freely, and ensured everyone felt welcome. "He's different today," Mrs. Peterson observed quietly to Beatrice as they cleared plates between courses. "Happier than I've seen him since before that Jenkins girl broke his heart." "What happened?" Beatrice asked, curiosity overcoming her usual reticence. Mrs. Peterson glanced toward the dining room to ensure they weren't overheard. Sarah Jenkins was the daughter of the town banker. Pretty thing, but ambitious. She and Brandon were engaged to be married when his father died suddenly. Everyone expected the wedding to proceed, but then Harold Blackwell came to town. Beatrice felt a chill at the mention of the man who had accosted her at the social. Blackwell. He was already wealthy from his ranch holdings in Montana. Swooped in and turned Sarah's head with promises of a mansion in Denver and winters in San Francisco. Mrs. Peterson shook her head disapprovingly. She broke off the engagement publicly, humiliating Brandon. A week later, she married Blackwell. "That's terrible," Beatrice murmured, understanding now the animosity between the two men. "The worst part came after," Mrs. Peterson continued. "Less than a year into the marriage, Sarah died in childbirth. The baby too. Some say Blackwell blamed Brandon somehow, as if he'd cursed them. Nonsense, of course, but grief makes people irrational." The story gave Beatrice a new perspective on both men and explained Brandon's reluctance to form attachments. Yet today, watching him laugh with Emma as he taught her a clapping game between courses, it was hard to see the wounded man beneath. As the day waned and the ranch hands drifted off to their quarters, Emma fell asleep on a small settee in the parlor. Brandon covered her with a blanket before joining Beatrice by the fireplace. "Thank you," she said softly, "for making this Christmas special for Emma. It's been a long time since she's experienced a proper family celebration." Brandon gazed into the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "My father used to say Christmas isn't about the place or the presents. It's about creating a space where people feel they belong." He looked at her then, his expression open and vulnerable. "You and Emma, you've brought something back to this house that's been missing for a long time." Beatrice's heart raced at his words and the intensity behind them. "Brandon, A pounding at the front door interrupted her, followed by Cody's voice calling urgently, "Boss, you better come quick." Brandon was on his feet instantly, striding to the door with Beatrice following close behind. Cody stood on the porch, his face grim in the lantern light. "Riders coming fast from the north property line," he reported. "Thompson rode ahead to warn us. Says it looks like Blackwell's men, and they're carrying torches." Brandon's expression hardened. "Get the men armed and ready, and send someone to town for the sheriff." He turned to Beatrice. "Take Emma to the root cellar beneath the kitchen. Stay there until I come for you." Beatrice grabbed his arm as he reached for his gun belt hanging by the door. "Brandon, this is because of me, isn't it? Something Blackwell thinks he knows." "It doesn't matter why," Brandon said firmly. "What matters is keeping you and Emma safe." He cupped her face briefly, his touch gentle despite the urgency of the moment. "Trust me, Beatrice. Please." As she gathered the still sleeping Emma in her arms, Beatrice was seized by a terrible certainty. Her past had finally caught up with her, and this time, it wasn't just her own future at stake, but Brandon's as well. The root cellar was cool and dark, smelling of earth and preserved vegetables. Beatrice settled Emma on a pile of empty burlap sacks, the child still mercifully asleep despite being moved. Above them, she could hear the muffled sounds of men shouting and horses neighing. Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Mama, where are we?" "Shoo, sweetheart," Beatrice soothed, stroking her daughter's hair. "We're playing a game of hide and seek with Mr. Falconer. We need to be very quiet." Emma's brow furrowed as she registered the tension in her mother's voice. "Is something bad happening?" Before Beatrice could answer, the cellar door opened, and Mrs. Peterson descended the steps, her face pale in the lamplight she carried. "They're demanding to search the property," she whispered, setting the lamp on a shelf. "Mr. Falconer is trying to reason with them, but Blackwell is drunk and making wild accusations." "What kind of accusations?" Beatrice asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Mrs. Peterson hesitated, glancing at Emma. "He says you're not who you claim to be, that you're wanted for theft in Colorado Territory. Something about stolen Army funds." The blood drained from Beatrice's face. It was exactly as she had feared. Somehow, Blackwell had discovered her secret, or enough of it to be dangerous. "Mrs. Peterson," she said urgently, "I need you to stay with Emma. There's something I must do." "Mama, no," Emma cried, suddenly frightened. "Don't leave me." Beatrice knelt before her daughter, gripping her small shoulders. "Emma, listen to me. Sometimes we have to be brave, even when we're scared. I need to help Mr. Falconer, but I promise I'll come back for you. Do you trust me?" Emma nodded tearfully. "But I want to help too." "You can help by staying safe," Beatrice insisted, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I love you more than anything in this world, Emma. Remember that." With a last grateful glance at Mrs. Peterson, Beatrice took the lamp and climbed the cellar steps, praying she wasn't making a terrible mistake. Outside, chaos had erupted in the yard. Blackwell and a dozen men on horseback faced off against Brandon and his ranch hands, who had formed a defensive line in front of the house. Torches cast an eerie, flickering light over the scene, shadows dancing like restless spirits across the snow-covered ground. "I'm telling you, Falconer, that woman is a thief and possibly worse," Blackwell shouted, his words slightly slurred. "The Army's been looking for her for 3 years. There's a reward for information leading to her capture." "Even if what you say is true," Brandon responded, his voice steady despite the rifle trained on Blackwell's chest, "this isn't how justice works. If you have evidence, take it to the sheriff." "The sheriff is in your pocket," Blackwell sneered. "I'm doing my civic duty. Now stand aside, or we'll burn this place to the ground to find her." Beatrice stepped out of the shadows, her heart pounding, but her resolve firm. "There's no need for that," she called, drawing all eyes to her. "I'm right here." "Beatrice, no." Brandon moved toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "It's time for the truth, Brandon." She faced Blackwell, lifting her chin defiantly. "What exactly do you think you know about me, Mr. Blackwell?" Blackwell's face contorted into a triumphant grin. "Beatrice Miller isn't your real name, is it? You're Beatrice Marshall, wife of Captain John Marshall of the 7th Cavalry, who stole $20,000 from the Army payroll before deserting his post. He died in a shootout with Army investigators, but you and the money disappeared." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Beatrice was aware of Brandon's shocked gaze, but she kept her eyes on Blackwell. "Parts of your story are true," she acknowledged. "My husband did steal that money, and he did die in a confrontation with investigators. But I never saw a penny of it, and I've been running not because I'm guilty, but because no one would believe my innocence." "A convenient claim," Blackwell scoffed. "The Army investigator I spoke with says otherwise." "Lieutenant Monroe?" Beatrice asked, noting Blackwell's surprise that she knew the name. "He's been pursuing me because he believes I know where John hid the money. But I don't." She turned to Brandon finally, her eyes pleading for understanding. "I changed our name to protect Emma. If I'd stayed, they would have taken her from me while they conducted their investigation. I couldn't risk losing her." Brandon's expression was unreadable in the torchlight. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid," she admitted, her voice breaking. "Afraid you wouldn't believe me. Afraid of being forced to run again. Afraid of losing." She couldn't finish the sentence, but her eyes conveyed what she couldn't say. "Afraid of losing you." A small voice called from the porch. "She's telling the truth." All heads turned to see Emma standing there, Mrs. Peterson trying unsuccessfully to hold her back. "Emma, go back inside," Beatrice cried, panic rising in her throat. But Emma darted forward, clutching something in her hand. She stopped beside her mother, facing Blackwell with the same determined expression she'd worn when first asking Brandon for a job. "My pa was a bad man," she declared. "He hurt my mama and took money that wasn't his. Before he died, he gave me this." She held up a small, tarnished locket. "He said it was the only thing worth keeping, but I never could open it." Beatrice stared at the locket in astonishment. "Emma, where did you get that?" "I've never seen it before. Pa gave it to me the night he left for the last time. Said it was our secret." Emma handed it to her mother. "Maybe it tells where the money is." With trembling fingers, Beatrice examined the locket. It was old, with an intricate design she didn't recognize. When she pressed on the side, it sprang open, revealing not a photograph as expected, but a tiny folded paper. Brandon stepped closer, his rifle lowered but his attention sharp. "What is it?" Beatrice unfolded the paper carefully. Inside was a crude map with an X marked near what appeared to be a river bend, and a series of numbers that made no immediate sense to her. "Coordinates," Brandon said, studying the paper over her shoulder. "This could be a map to where the money is hidden." Blackwell dismounted, swaying slightly as he advanced toward them. "Hand that over," he demanded. "That's evidence of her guilt. It's evidence of her innocence," Brandon countered, stepping between Blackwell and Beatrice. "She didn't know about this locket or the map inside it. Neither did the army, or they'd have found the money by now." Blackwell's face darkened with rage. "You're a fool, Falconer, defending a criminal because you've fallen for her pretty face. I'm taking her in for the reward." He reached for his pistol, but before he could draw, the sound of multiple rifles being cocked froze him in place. "I wouldn't," said Sheriff Daniels, riding into the yard with several deputies. "Threatening folks on Christmas Day is bad enough, Blackwell, but drawing on them crosses a line I can't ignore." Relief washed over Beatrice as the sheriff took control of the situation, ordering Blackwell and his men to disperse. As they reluctantly complied, hurling threats and obscenities, Brandon turned to her, his expression still guarded. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "About everything." Beatrice nodded, her heart heavy. The truth was out now, but at what cost to the tentative happiness they'd begun to build? In the parlor of the main house, with Emma finally asleep again upstairs and the ranch hands standing guard outside, Beatrice told Brandon the full story, how she'd married John Marshall at 17, dazzled by his uniform and confidence, how his gambling had gradually consumed him, how she discovered his plan to steal the payroll money only after he'd already done it. "He came home that night with blood on his hands," she said, staring into the dying fire. "He'd killed a guard during the theft. That's when I knew the man I married was gone completely." She took a shuddering breath. "I told him I was taking Emma and leaving, that I wanted no part of his crime. He threatened to kill me if I did." Brandon's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her continue. "The next day, Army investigators came to our quarters. John fled, and they questioned me for hours. They were convinced I was his accomplice." She twisted her hands in her lap. 3 days later, they found John in a saloon 2 towns over. There was a shootout, and he was killed, but the money was never recovered. "And Lieutenant Monroe believed you knew where it was hidden," Brandon finished for her. Beatrice nodded. "He became obsessed with the case. Even after his superiors ruled there wasn't enough evidence to charge me, he kept coming around, watching the house, questioning neighbors. One night, he showed up drunk, suggesting he could help me if I was cooperative." Her voice hardened at the memory. "That's when I decided to take Emma and run. We've been moving ever since, never staying in one place long enough for him to find us." "Until now," Brandon said softly. "Until now," she agreed, meeting his gaze at last. "Brandon, I swear to you, I never knew about the locket or the map. Emma never told me." "I believe you," he said simply. Relief flooded through her. "You do? I've watched you for months, Beatrice. You work harder than anyone I know. You sacrifice for your daughter without complaint. Those aren't the actions of someone sitting on stolen money." He moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "Besides, a woman with $20,000 wouldn't be wearing darn stockings." A surprised laugh escaped her. "You noticed that?" "I notice everything about you," he admitted, his thumbs tracing circles on her palms. "Including how carefully you guard your secrets. But now that I know the truth, we can fix this." "How?" she asked, hardly daring to hope. "We'll find the money using the map in the locket and return it to the army. With the stolen funds recovered, they'll have no reason to pursue you further." His eyes held hers intently. "You and Emma won't have to run anymore. You can stay here, make a real home." The offer hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. "Brandon," Beatrice whispered, "after everything that's happened, everything I've hidden from you, how can you still want us here?" Brandon released her hands to gently cup her face. "Because in 3 months, you and Emma have brought more life and joy to this ranch than it's seen in years. Because watching you with your daughter makes me imagine a future I'd given up on." His voice dropped lower, rough with emotion. "Because I'm falling in love with you, Beatrice Marshall, and I don't want to spend another day wondering if you'll disappear from my life." Tears welled in her eyes at his declaration. "I've been falling in love with you too," she confessed. Even when I told myself I shouldn't, that it wasn't safe or fair to you. Brandon's thumbs brushed away the tears that spilled onto her cheeks. Then let's make it safe. Together. His lips met hers in a gentle kiss that deepened as she responded, years of loneliness and fear melting away in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally parted, both breathless, Brandon rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, we'll send a telegram to the army about the map. But tonight, he hesitated, then smiled. Tonight, let's just be grateful for second chances. The journey to recover the stolen money took Brandon and Sheriff Daniels to a remote canyon near the Colorado border. Following the map from the locket, they discovered a waterproof satchel buried beneath a distinctive rock formation. Inside was the full $20,000, wrapped in oilskin and remarkably well preserved. True to his word, Brandon arranged for the money to be returned to the army with a full explanation of how it had been found. Lieutenant Monroe arrived 2 weeks later, his face sour with disappointment when confronted with evidence of Beatrice's innocence. This doesn't prove she wasn't involved in the original theft, he insisted to the commanding officer who had accompanied him. No, the colonel agreed, but it demonstrates she didn't benefit from it and has actively assisted in its recovery. He handed Beatrice an official document. This letter clears you of all suspicion, Mrs. Marshall. The army considers this matter closed. As the military contingent prepared to leave, Monroe approached Beatrice one last time. You got lucky, he said bitterly. I still think you knew more than you claimed. What I know, Beatrice replied evenly, is that your obsession with me kept you from investigating other possibilities. That's why it took 3 years to recover the money. She met his gaze without flinching. I hope you find peace, Lieutenant. I know I have. The significance of those words became clear 2 months later, on a perfect spring day, when Beatrice stood beneath a flower-adorned arch in the meadow behind the main house. Emma, serving as flower girl, beamed from beside Mrs. Peterson as Brandon took Beatrice's hands in his. When a determined little girl asked me to hire her mother, he said, his voice carrying clearly to the assembled guests. I never imagined she was delivering my future wife to my doorstep. His eyes crinkled with the smile that had become increasingly frequent in recent months. Emma convinced me to give you a chance, but it was your strength, your grace under pressure, and your unwavering love for your daughter that made me fall in love with you. Beatrice squeezed his hands, her heart so full she could barely speak. You offered us shelter when we had nowhere else to go, she replied. But more than that, you offered understanding when the truth came out, and hope when I thought all was lost. Her voice strengthened with conviction. I promise to love you faithfully, to build our family together, and to create a home filled with the joy and belonging you've shown us is possible. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from the wedding guests. Emma darted forward to wrap her arms around both of them, and Brandon lifted her up between them in a three-way embrace that symbolized the family they had become. Later, as lanterns illuminated the wedding feast and fiddle music filled the air, Brandon led his bride in their first dance as husband and wife. Happy, he murmured against her temple. Beatrice looked around at the joyful celebration, at Emma dancing on Cody's boots, at the home they had built together. More than I ever thought possible, she answered truthfully. Though I still can't believe how it all started, with my daughter marching up to a handsome rancher and demanding he hire her mother. Brandon laughed, spinning her in a graceful turn. Best business decision I ever made. And what about Emma's request that you make us family? Beatrice teased. Was that part of your business plan too? His expression softened as he pulled her closer. That was the heart of it all along. He nodded toward Emma, who was now proudly showing Mrs. Peterson her new locket, a gift from Brandon that morning. She knew what we needed before we did. As twilight deepened into night, stars appearing like diamond dust across the vast Wyoming sky, Brandon and Beatrice stood on the porch of what was now their home. His arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, they watched the last of their wedding guests depart. I used to stand here alone, watching the stars and wondering if this ranch would ever feel like more than just land and buildings, Brandon confessed. Now I know it wasn't the place that was incomplete. It was me. Beatrice turned in his arms to face him. And now, his answer was in his kiss, tender, passionate, and filled with promise. Now, he said when they finally parted, we're home. From an upstairs window, Emma watched her mother and new father embracing in the moonlight. She clutched her carved wooden horse in one hand and her new locket in the other, treasures that represented the journey from frightened fugitives to beloved family. "I did it, Pa," she whispered to the night sky. "I found us a real home." And beneath the vast Wyoming stars, the Flying F Ranch settled into peaceful slumber, its boundaries now encircling not just land and livestock, but a family bound together by love, trust, and the courage to begin again.